So I think this is a classic example. Unless there's some major disruptions, I'm pretty sure the U.S. military will probably render Iran probably defenseless rather rapidly. We might get that classic pump into the risks and dump afterwards. So I'm fully expecting come Monday, crude oil will probably be lower.
Mike, I'm going to guess that you've been paying attention to what's been going on in Vienna with OPEC Plus and what we've heard from some delegates. I think two of them that we've cited in our reporting, that there is interest among OPEC Plus nations to boost production more significantly as a result of this. For the layman, what would that mean if OPEC Plus were to do that? We knew they were going to increase production slightly. This would be a much larger increase if this comes to pass.
I think the key word, David, should be mentioned is coordination. This seems to be pretty well coordinated. Mr. Trump has been quite friendly with Saudis and Middle Eastern countries for quite a while. He does have an election coming up. He has a motivated interest for a lower energy, and I think he's going to get it. So you're seeing part of that whole magic in addition to what happened in Venezuela. There's pretty good indications that the leader of the world's largest energy, crude oil, natural gas producer and net exporter who wants lower prices will probably get in by the time we get to the midterms. Once we get through this discombobulation period.
Mm-hmm. Mike, I want to ask you about something I was not even thinking would have a direct reaction after these events, and that's cryptocurrency. Crypto went up as much as 2.2% to a little over 68,000 per token after Iran confirmed the death of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Why? And why are we seeing that movement? And where do we expect that to go? Is crypto usually this reactive to world events, or does it depend on the event?
Well, you're talking mainly Bitcoin is a risk-on asset. You mentioned right when the strikes hit, initially dropped to 63,000, and it's pumped up to 68,000. I think the key word, as you mentioned, with the death of the leader in Iran, is the relief on a global basis. Relief. Okay. Yes, regime change is difficult, but just taking him out, like President Trump did with Maduro, is a significant step. And it's just been almost 50 years that Iran has been considered a bit of a, an antagonist and a pariah in the global scale. But Bitcoin is a good example of that relief, although Bitcoin's in a bear market. The stock market's much different, but I think it shows you that relief kind of kicking in. People are glad that the risks of the initial invasion are over. And Bitcoin is a good leading indicator. But one thing also, it's one of the most liquid markets that trades on weekends, so it's really the go-to.
We've talked about oil, talked about Bitcoin. Let me ask you about natural gas, because that's certainly an issue at play here as well, as we look at the Strait of Hormuz and look at how ship traffic has really come to a standstill as a result of this happening. When it comes to LNG, what should we be paying attention to here? This is also an important part of the commodities story in light of these strikes.
Good to go right there. My colleague, Will Hares, reminds me constantly that 20% of the world's LNG ships through the Strait. But let's remember the facts. The Strait has never been completely closed off and sealed. And we have to be careful with the bravado and the risks from Iran versus the facts. If the new U.S. Navy did not cover this risk initially before the invasion, they would be shame on them. And I think it's very unlikely. Now it's shut off a little bit now for safety, but I think the U.S. Navy has this pretty well covered. Remember, one key thing about what happened here is we've had a precedent. In 1988, Operation Praying Mantis, the U.S. Navy wiped out the entire Iranian Navy in a couple hours. So I'm not so much worried about that, but I think it's more of the fear right now that'll be overcome within the next few days of this beginning of the hostilities.
It is a weekend, and for those of us who are less familiar with the commodities markets, I do want to ask you about Pax Gold. This is a digital token that represents about an ounce of bullion. Can you explain to us why this is important, what we're seeing there on Iran war hedges, and if you think that's going to represent where the commodities markets are going as we turn into the week?
Pax Gold and also Tethered Gold are digital tokens that track the metal, and they're ideal for showing where things are trading. You can arb between them, but it's also an example of what's happening in that space. It's all going digital, tracking real assets. But I think I'm glad you went to gold, because if you look at an asset that's really the most priced for geopolitical issues, it's gold. It was up 20% on the year. It's the most stretched versus its 60-month moving average in maybe 50 years. It's almost the most expensive ever versus crude oil. So I think if we get through this period with a little bit of détente and relief, realizing that China and Russia have lost Iran and Venezuela and Syria and maybe Cuba next, I think that gold geopolitical premium has a lot of risk of heading back lower as we head deeper into trading this coming week.